Thursday. Excuse me a minute while I get my screen set up. It's Thursday, February 18th, and I'm sitting down for my second cup of coffee, and there's a few things I wanted to talk with you about today. It's about a new report that came out regarding the drop in life expectancy, in part due to the COVID-19 deaths that have been ravaging our nation. And so I want to discuss that a little bit this morning. But first, as I always do before I begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from what's now known as Washington, D.C. And these are the lands of the Piscataway. And I want to honor the Piscataway as being the host people, the stewards of these lands. I want to state how humble I am to be living on these lands. And I want to thank them for the hundreds, the thousands of years that they've stewarded these lands. So my Piscataway relatives. It's an honor to be living on these lands today. There was every morning when I wake up, I make my first cup of coffee, and I sit down and I have my headset on and I listen to a series of news podcasts, AP News, NPR News, ABC, the BBC, and a few financial news services, Reuters, and then I end usually with Fox News and CNN, which are the propaganda machines. And normally when I listen to these series of news podcasts, I get the same headlines from about 7 or 8 different perspectives, emphasizing one thing, playing down one part, playing up another part. I tend to trust agencies like AP and NPR better. I tend to trust some of the foreign based news agencies a bit better. And then I listen to CNN and Fox at the end, so I get the political spin from the propaganda machines. So I know how the two sides are going to be talking about them. And as I listened this morning, one of the stories that kept coming up is this new report that came out recently regarding a drop in life expectancy. And it was reported by several agencies. I'm going to share a story that I found on AP highlighting this, just so if you're following along and you want to click on the chat in the comment section, here's the AP story regarding that report on the drop in life expectancy. And one of the things that they reported in this story is that, and I'm just reading from some of the stories I read today, life expectancy in the U.S. fell by an entire year in the first half of 2020 as COVID-19 swept through the country. Health data published Thursday found a decline not seen since World War II. And then it went on to talk about how there was a disparity in this decrease in life expectancy that especially hit communities of color, the Black community, African American community, the Hispanic and Latino community saw large increases. And it reported that between 2019 and the first half of 2020, life expectancy decreased by 2.7 years for Black people, down to 72 years. And it dropped 1.9 years for Hispanics, down to 79.9. And it dropped 0.8 years for white people, down to 78. Now, we've been hearing all throughout the pandemic about the challenges with our communities of color, who not only have been bearing the brunt of this pandemic because of the inequality of life and of income and of housing and things like that, but also because of the jobs that these communities tend to work, where we will more often be in some of what are now considered essential jobs, frontline jobs, delivery, store clerks, places, factories, and other things like that businesses had to keep going, but also required close contact with the public or with coworkers, therefore saw much higher rates of infection from COVID-19. And I appreciated that this report came out and that it highlighted that there was a racial discrepancy between people of color and white America in regards not only to COVID-19 infections, but to the decrease in life expectancy. I think this discrepancy needs to be pointed out. We need to highlight that there is a discrepancy here racially that exists within our country. However, as I listened to these reports on the news, I didn't hear anyone reporting on the numbers in regards to the drop in life expectancy for Native Americans. And I know the life expectancy rate for Native Americans is low. I know that the infection rate for COVID-19 for Native Americans is astronomically high. And so I was surprised that we were not included in the reports that I was hearing, even on sources like AP and NPR. I don't expect mainstream ABC, NBC, and the two propaganda machines to talk about it, but I thought some of the more less commercialized might be talking about, or even some of the foreign services. And so I did some searching, and I found a report on NBC that was basically a reposting of an AP report, which is what I shared. And at the end of that report, it said these preliminary report did not analyze trends for Asian or Native Americans. And so I decided to look up the numbers, and so I could actually know what the actual numbers were. So first, I'm going to share with you a report that was on a site called The Balance that is quoting some CDC data, and it gives life expectancy by race. And this was written in late 2020, I believe, or early 2021. And so it's fairly accurate. And it identifies that Native Americans have the lowest life expectancy of 75.06 years. African Americans are at 75.54 years. White Americans are at 79.12 years. Hispanic Latino Americans are at 82.89 years. And Asian Americans are 86.67 years. And so, as you see, Native Americans have the lowest life expectancy of the races here in the United States. So then I wanted to look up COVID-19 deaths by race. And I found this report, which I'm going to share with you now, that is from a CDC website that gives ratio of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths as compared to white Americans. And it shows the numbers for American Indians or Native Americans, Asians, Black and African Americans, and Latino. And as you can see, the numbers for Native Americans are the highest in all three categories. We're at 1.9 rate higher than whites in cases. We're at 3.7% times higher in hospitalizations, and we are at 2.4 times the rate of deaths, and which is higher than any of the other races as well. And so Native Americans have the lowest life expectancy and the highest rate of cases, hospitalization, and deaths, and yet our numbers were not included in this report. Now, on one hand, this is status quo, right? This is what our nation does, which is it has never learned how to talk about Native Americans. This was very evident even in the campaign I ran in 2020, where the media, the mainstream media, literally ignored my campaign. I've talked about this before. They actually wrote me out of stories. The mainstream media did not know what to do with a Native American who was running with some ideas to lead this nation. Usually they will put us either in we are the savages who are doing something fierce to try and destroy this place, or we are the pitiful people who need charity. And the mainstream media didn't have a category of what to do with someone who was trying to lead. And so literally they would write my campaign out of stories. And this isn't just about my campaign, right? This is what the United States does throughout. The mainstream media does regularly. And so again, I wanted to come on, not to complain, but I want to point out that as you listen to the news, and even if you try to diversify your news sources, you're not going to hear the whole story. And you're going to miss some very important things that need to be talked about, that need to be part of the dialogue as we talk about these very important issues. We must talk about the discrepancy between people of color and white Americans in regards to COVID-19 deaths, as well as life expectancy drops. And we have to have a complete and as full conversation as we possibly can have. And the mainstream media is not capable of doing that. And you'll also notice that there was one other group that was left out of the report, and it was identified that it was Asian Americans. Now, the interesting thing about that is Asian Americans actually have better numbers. In cases, they have a slightly higher rate of hospitalizations, and they have a similar rate of deaths as white Americans. But they were also not reported in this, and we just have to acknowledge that we do not know how to include the Asian American community in our national dialogue as well either. And I'm sharing a story right now and if you've been paying attention to the news, there has been a lot of violence throughout the pandemic, in part because of the way President Trump identified this as a China virus, but also just because of other issues going on. But there's been a rise in violent attacks against Asian Americans. And I'm sharing a story right now. I put it onto the chat feature here of an AP story that identifies this rising trend. And it's something we have to talk about. We need to find a way to bring all of these things into the dialogue, into the conversation. And so what I want to do right now is, I said before that I go through each morning and I listen to podcasts of a variety of news sources, most of them mainstream, trying to get a handle on not only what's going on in the world, but what our nation is going to be talking about throughout the day. And then I also try to search out other spaces that are talking about things that are not going to be covered in the mainstream. And I want to give just a few of those sources today. These are five sources that I used frequently to talk about and find out what's going on within Indian country in Native America. And the first one is Native News Online. If you follow me, you know that I write op-eds for them fairly regularly. I have been following and using that source for a long time, and it's a very good source to figure out and learn what's going on within Indian country. There's another one called Indian Z. I also have written frequently for them, and they do a very good job of bringing in a good perspective of what's going on throughout Indian country into their news. Indian Country Today is another news agency that does a very good job of covering Indian country on a national level, and I reference them and refer to them very frequently. There's a great podcast and radio show called Native America Calling that's based out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, and they also have very daily topics that they discuss of things going on within Indian country. And then, of course, being Navajo, I have to give a shout out to the Navajo Times, who I check their site fairly frequently too and follow some of their reporters because they do a very good job of covering the news of my home nation, the Navajo Nation, and I like to see what's going on back there. So those are just a few of the sources that I like to use to talk about or to find out what's going on within Indian country. And this is because, again, the mainstream media doesn't cover that. And so in that vein, I want to just share one other story that's going on right now. And some of this is being covered a bit by mainstream media, but a lot of it is not going to be covered as much. But we are actually going to have a confirmation hearing. The Senate's going to be holding confirmation hearings for Deb Holland, who has been nominated by Joe Biden to become the Secretary of the Interior. And that was reported by several Native news agencies this morning, and I saw it on a few mainstream medias. In Native News Online, they said the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee has scheduled Representative Deb Holland's hearing for her nomination as Interior Secretary for Tuesday, February 23rd, which is next week. It will begin at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time. This hearing will take place in the Dirksen Senate Office Building in the Senate Office Building at Washington, D.C., and will also be webcast live on the committee's website. So this is going to be a very major thing within Indian country, right? Because Deb, if confirmed, will become the first Native American to serve as secretary in a cabinet level position. And many people have a lot of are thrilled about this, including myself. And there's a lot of expectation that she will be a very strong and, to use her word, fierce voice for Native Americans and Indian country, as well as for our nation as a whole. And so I encourage you to follow that, those hearings, which will be happening next week. I'll definitely be talking a bit more about them myself. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on this morning. And I want to use this as a time to encourage you. And right, this is especially during what we're acknowledging as Black History Month, where we are acknowledging that mainstream media does not do a good job. Our nation does not do a good job of reporting on stories or even understanding the history of our marginalized communities. And I encourage you to continue to search out the stories of African Americans in our country, those who are making news, as well as the history that's happened and the way it's been changed and kind of whitewashed and disregarded by mainstream media and by just the country as a whole. Continue to use Black History Month to not to this is the only time where you look at those stories, but to set patterns of listening to those stories. And later this week, or probably next week, I'm going to do another Second Cup of Coffee where I'll talk specifically about some sources that you can use to learn about more about Black history, and also to keep in touch with news covered from an African American or Black perspective. And what are some voices that I listen to, and what are some people that I encourage you to continue to tune into in this process. But yeah, so I wanted to bring some of this out this morning, just to highlight some of these things and to encourage you to continue to diversify your news sources and to diversify where you get your information. I also want to announce that hopefully tomorrow I will be doing a Q&A on the book that I published about 1.5 years ago, Untitled Truths. There's been a lot of ways I've been referencing that book in my Second Cups of Coffee and in things going on, and talking about the origins of the doctrine of discovery and how it's been embedded in the foundations of our country. And so tomorrow, probably on Zoom, actually, we're going to hopefully set up a webinar where I'm going to answer some questions about the book Unsettling Truths. And so I'll be announcing that and putting the links for that up on my my website, or on my Facebook and my Twitter and my Instagram accounts. And I encourage you to follow me there, and you'll be able to join in on that live stream. We're going to open it up to the public and just see how many people want to join and ask some questions about Unsettling Truths. I hope to start doing this on a weekly basis, and eventually hope to invite my co-author to join me, Seung-Chan Ra, so we can have some discussion together about this book. So I'm going to share a link with you right now of just two Unsettling Truth. Actually, I see that it's been shared already within the link. One of my friends, Phil, is helping me do some moderation on these live streams, and so I think he already shared that in the live stream. So actually, I'll put it in because he's doing YouTube, and I'll share it for those on Facebook as well. Yeah, those are the things I wanted to talk about this morning. There's a lot going on in our country. Obviously, we have the massive winter storm that's hitting the country with cold weather and snow, and especially causing problems in places like Oregon and in the South, like Alabama, Louisiana, and especially Texas. So we need to keep the people in those areas in your prayers, and do what we can to encourage that they get the assistance and the help that they need, because our nation's become so dependent on technology. We often find when we have severe weather like this, we don't have the resources to even survive, right? When your house is heated by electricity, you don't have a fireplace, and power goes out, you're really kind of stuck. And so I'm going to be talking more about this at some point as well. But for now, I'm keeping those in those areas in my prayers. And I encourage you to make wise choices today about what is necessary and what's not necessary as you consider going out in this very severe cold weather. But yeah, those are the things I want to talk about. I hope that everybody has a very good day. I hope that you are able to stay warm. I hope that you're able to stay safe. I encourage you to continue to wear masks and to social distance. We see the numbers of COVID infections going down, but that's actually, I've heard, in part not due to vaccinations yet, but due to the holidays being over and people traveling and gathering together less. So continue to social distance and wear your masks. Protect yourself and those most vulnerable in your community from this horrible pandemic. And let's continue to walk in beauty. Actually, I have my relatives walk in beauty, and then we learn how to walk in beauty together. Hakko on that.